Beyond the Gates spoilers teased that the plan Doug had been nursing in the dark, careful as a violinist tuning before a concert, was never as secret as he thought. What he had imagined as a private, surgical operation to cut Joey down to size had become, in the brittle architecture of their lives, a public risk knitted together by too many small betrayals. The first fissure appeared not in a courtroom or through a lawyer's letter, but in the most intimate of betrayals, the knowledge that Joey had been listening. Joey had always been a man who planned for the room to be full of ears. He respected the small paranoia that keeps dangerous men alive. Years of living on the edge of legality had taught him to plant a device where he could not be seen and to trust the recordings more than the people around him. The recorder, simple, compact, disguised in a socket, a coffee machine, a hairdryer, was a habit born of necessity. When the chatter of Doug's voice threaded into one of those recordings, Joey's hands tightened around the plastic like a man squeezing a life preserver. He listened over and over, measuring breath against breath. Doug's words were careful but unmistakable: ledgers, an off-book set of books, a prosecutor who might be open to a deal. The plan smelled of desperation, the kind that corners a man and demands theater instead of justice. Doug's voice, in the recording, was a monotone of resolve. He had called Bill and described a methodical exposure of money flow laundering that could be traced back to Joey. He had promised proof without pain for Vanessa. "We don't touch her," Doug had said. "We expose him. We clean her name." The arrogance of that belief was almost beautiful in its ignorance. Perhaps because he had to, that there exists a line in the criminal world that stops at the family door. That belief would prove naive. Joey's reaction to the tape was not immediate rage, it was assessment. It was the same look a chess player gives when he realizes an opponent has moved the queen into danger. Joey's first move would be to test the water, call Vanessa, make a quiet observation before he decided whether to become a thunderstorm. Vanessa, a woman who had learned years ago that survival is a musculature made of composure, felt the danger in an instinct that had been honed by secrecy. She had not been the one to plant the bug, and she had not expected to become the channel through which Doug's plan leaked. When she realized, by seeing Doug's furtive glances and the way he held his phone like contraband, that he was moving again, she panicked, not for herself, but for the precarious geometry of her children's lives. She saw Doug's attempt to take down Joey as an attempt to reconstitute a life that had been worn thin by humiliation and neglect. Her response was to warn him. It was a small, quiet act, a note passed under a door, an unexpected text during a rehearsal. Vanessa convinced herself that warning him would be enough, that the storm could be paused, parceled out in small doses that would not reach the children. In truth, she was lying to herself as much as to anyone else. Joey's suspicion that Vanessa was the leak had come before he had the tape's full implications. He'd watched the way she shifted when Doug's name came up, the sudden defensiveness, the too calm tone of her denials. Men like Joey read people the way a drunk reads a menu. He was always looking for the single line that could save or ruin a night. When he confronted Vanessa softly, never accusing, always inviting confession, she broke the way dry twigs do under the pressure of a thumb. She told him the truth with the kind of bargaining that has been perfected in households where the stakes are survival. "He's only looking out for the kids," she said. "He thinks this will make it right. He thinks it will make him whole again." There was the admission that she wanted him to have. There was also the admission she would never voice, that part of her was terrified, not for herself but for how the children would see what she had done. Sex with Joey was not a solace for her so much as an erasure. It was the honest, animalistic interruption of a life that had become all compromise. They found each other in a motel room that smelled like old cigarettes and cheap detergent, and in that squalid privacy they could pretend the rest of the world did not exist. But Joey wanted more than the transient. He wanted a shared life where possession could be clearer than guilt. He wanted cohabitation. He wanted the old domestic script: sharing a bed, having a joint account, living under the same roof, because in Joey's mind, cohabitation fixed more than convenience. It would be the formal seal of belonging and would protect him from the humiliation of being one of many dark secrets in Vanessa's life. Vanessa refused with the kind of bluntness that surprised them both. She drew the boundaries with the clean efficiency of someone who had been making difficult, protective choices for years. "We are not a refuge," she said, hands white-knuckled on the motel bedspread. "We are not replacing what I have at home. You don't get to take that from my children." She spoke as if reciting a catechism of motherhood and survival. For Vanessa, the marriage, whatever its ruin, was still a scaffold that held children. To fall into Joey's arms wholly would be to flatten that structure and risk everything. There was fear, too, that living with Joey would mean the public concreteness of a scandal she could not undo. Privacy, such as it was, kept her offenses half-shadowed, manageable. In the private rooms where men make bargains, Doug paced. He had laid out the theory: if Bill could tie Joey to money movement, to the off-book accounts that carried the true ledger of his operations, then law could be a blade. Doug insisted on the precision of his plan. "We expose him without exposing her," he told Bill, the tone of the man who still believed in the fairness of rules. Bill, a man with a practical streak and a coward's tendency to add margins between truth and danger, listened and worried. He had access to investigators, to people who could follow a paper trail, but he also understood the way the world folds differently when a man like Joey is involved. Evidence needs context, it needs an institution willing to pursue it, it needs a witness who won't fold under pressure. Bill's uncertainty was not rooted in ethics only, it was also ledgered with fear. He had assets, people depending on him, an apartment that was a small, fragile ecosystem of bills. Taking on Joey was a risk that could cause real harm. Doug tried to inspire him with the righteousness of the cause, with the idea that they were doing this to restore Vanessa's honor and protect the children. Bill wanted to believe him. He wanted to be the sort of man who would step up for a wronged woman. But then he thought of the tape he had once heard Joey's laugh. The casual cruelty of a man who had risen from nothing and who had no qualms about making others disappear. Bill's abscess of doubt grew. Hayley, angry, alert, a woman whose motives are sometimes a cocktail of love and vanity, had not intended to become a fulcrum in this drama. She had overheard Bill and Doug in a moment of aimless eavesdropping that began as curiosity and ended as obligation. A shadow of the conversation had been enough: the ledgers, the legal lanes, the insistence that Vanessa must remain untouched. The knowledge was a hot coal she did not know how to set down. She was married to Bill not merely by paperwork but by a series of small, daily agreements, and the thought of being complicit in a scheme that might blow their life into shards frightened her. Her instinctive move was to find Randy. Randy had the flexible moral compass of a man who had learned that the world rewards movement and punishes stubbornness. He had always been a survivor, the sort of person who could be a friend when it suited him and a mercenary when the price was right. When Hayley told him, she did not imagine treachery, she imagined help. But Randy smelled opportunity. He saw an angle where he, the man with no illusions, could sell the news to the highest bidder. Joey, who always respected men who could be useful, would be a better bet than Doug, who seemed to be cutting both his own throat and the throat of anyone who stood with him. Randy's choice was quick and clean. He walked into Joey's orbit with the easy insolence of a man who knew how to cash in favors. "Doug's up to something," he said, casually, as if mentioning the weather. Randy's tone was the same one he used when he wanted something from a bartender, friendly but transactional. Joey's face tightened into a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Bring me everything," Joey said. The instruction was simple. Randy left with a pocket full of directions and a head full of calculations. He could imagine the look on Doug's face when he learned a man he trusted had folded. He could imagine the cash Joey would offer. He could imagine a life avoided. Joey's counterattack was not immediate violence. It was a plan of co-option. He moved with the kind of patience that can be a weapon. He arranged a meeting with Bill under the neutral pretense of mediation. Joey could be a smooth operator when he wanted to be. He arrived, prepared with charm that wrapped itself around the room like a warm coat. He spoke of damage to business, of reputation, of the small inconveniences of legal entanglement. He made no threats at first. He preferred the art of persuasion. "We don't have to destroy each other," Joey told Bill, his voice honeyed and precise. "You and I can find a way for you to walk away clean. I'll protect you." The offer was a hand extended with the promise of oil where there had been a razor. Bill, who had only glimpsed the potential of peril, felt the scales tip. Joey's overtures came with the subtle certainty of a man who could make things happen. People moved, accounts adjusted, a quiet bully's currency of reputation and fear. Joey dangled the possibility of money and of safety like a lure. Bill felt something he had not admitted in himself, a relief at the prospect of avoiding the fight. He heard Doug's voice in his head, steady cadence of a man who wanted justice but who also wanted to preserve domesticity, and the promise of a quieter path whispered in Joey's baritone. Bill was not noble. He was small and pragmatic and terrified. He nodded, half-formed agreements already shaping in his mind. Doug felt the calculus shift in his gut. He had always believed that truth would be sufficient currency to buy safety. He had believed in a moral arithmetic that would reward rightness and punish cruelty. The world, however, often rewards those who act first and loudly. When Randy turned, the story became dangerous. Word traveled in a way that was faster than paper and slower than gossip. Bill found himself accosted by an offer that blurred the line between compromise and survival. Joey was not merely a threat, he was a solution for men too weary to fight. Doug watched as the men on whom he had relied folded, and his isolation became a cold room in which he paced. The psychological toll on Doug was more than tactical. He felt betrayed in ways that cut deeper than professional humiliation. Vanessa's warning to him to spare the children felt like a betrayal because she had not asked him to stop. She had simply wanted him to be careful. The awareness that she had been the vector of his exposure made him resent her in ways he could not publicly admit. It also confused his sense of paternal protectiveness. He had promised himself that he would not let Joey touch the family he and Vanessa had built, and yet the plan had begun in secrecy without her full consent. He stood at a crossroads of ethics and desire. To go after Joey meant risking Vanessa, to stand down meant letting the man who had destroyed everything roam free. In the corners of this living tangle, the children slept ignorant of the calculations being made in rooms where decisions were heavy as lead. They continued to be the unspoken variable. The reason Vanessa refused a new life with Joey, and the reason Doug wanted to avoid a plan that would soak the family in scandal. The children were the axis on which all the adults spun, their needs and faces the instruments each would use as a cover or as a justification. As the night deepened and the city softened its lights to a weary glow, preparations were made for moves and counter-moves. Doug drafted lists and memos, trying to find evidence that could survive Joey's counter-surge. Joey instructed Randy to dig deeper into Bill's life, to see what leverage might be had. Vanessa called Doug in the middle of the night, her voice thin with worry and a kind of fatigue that had nothing to do with sleep. "Be careful," she said. Doug promised he would be, and in the quiet that followed, the lie between them felt like a rope stretched across a canyon. This was not a plan that would resolve neatly. The machinery of revenge, once set into motion, had a life of its own. Men like Joey do not surrender their empires to moralities, they buy fences and hire men to patch windows and remove pictures. Men like Doug, however noble their intentions, discover that nobility in the criminal world is an anachronism. The question now was not whether the plan would fail. Doug had to accept that the probability of failure was high, but what would be sacrificed when it did? Would Bill be bought and persuaded to betray justice? Would Randy's survival instincts push him to swap loyalty for favor? Could Vanessa's divided heart keep the family intact when the heat rose? They each inhabited a small planet of fear and hope, moving like magnets that repelled and attracted in equal measure. The audio of Doug's conspiratorial planning sat in Joey's pocket like a live grenade. The morality of Doug's mission was heavy enough to be admirable. The tactic was naive enough to be doomed. Vanessa's hands trembled with the knowledge that she had warned him, that she had tried to shepherd the storm away from the children, and that in doing so she had become the very crack that allowed it all to leak. Bill stood at the edge of an abyss of his own making, while Hayley's conscience, if it could be called that, shone a footlight on a truth she had set loose. Randy, who had always chosen life over loyalty, had opted for the side that promised to pay. Night turned toward dawn and choices hardened. Every whispered conversation, every small, sordid bargain set the table for a reckoning that could not be predicted and would not be kind. They were arming themselves with secrets and promises, and none of them felt wholly ready for the price those tools might demand. The recordings in Joey's hands hummed with possibility and peril. The ledger Doug imagined as his proof was still only a phantom in a manila folder. The architecture of their lives had shifted. The quiet house where children slept would soon be a witness to the outcome of choices made in rooms lit by screens and fear. The storm was gathering, and everyone in its path could feel the first cold breath of weather that promises ruin.